Today's daf we're going to be learning is Sanhedrin daf Ayin. Today's daf is sponsored by our gold and loving memory of Art's father Joseph, Yosef ben Shlomo Shabtai Rachel, on his 24th yahrzeit. My father was an ordinary man of extraordinary dignity, decency, and dedication. He loved to watch my brother and I play on the tennis courts directly opposite our living room window. One day he came out and shocked us both with a huge booming topspin forehand. We didn't even know he played. I wish we had had more time together. Today's daf is sponsored by Harriet Hartman in loving memory of her parents, Benjamin ben Zev Vehindi Yosef and Fruma bat Nachum Natan Esther, whose yahrzeit are 4 days apart, 23rd and 27th of Shvat. They would have supported and admired my learning. And this week's learning is sponsored by Cliff and Minafelig in honor of their newborn twin grandchildren, Naveh and Leah. Naveh is an oasis, safe, open space in the desert. Leah means God is with me. We wish for them a safe space to protect them, and that God will be with them at all times. Mazal tov. Okay, we're going to get started with our daf. I'm going to go back to the very last line of yesterday because there's something interesting that I wanted to add. We ended with that interesting line about that might have not sat with us so well about the ben velo bat. So on the one hand, while it's nice that a bat cannot become a ben sorer mored, the reason the Gemara gives, it's a gzeret hakatuv. It's because the Torah says ben velo bat, but you would have thought, Rabbi Shimon comes and says, you would have thought Bedinu Sheteru Yalio Keben Sorer Moreh. All the more so because, as we're going to learn later, and we mentioned a little bit, the Ben Sorer Moreh were concerned with where these initial actions are going to take them. It's going to take them to bad places, meaning we're going to learn today that they steal money from their parents, that we're really going to get to tomorrow, in order to buy meat and drink wine. And then when they don't have enough money, right, it'll all be like a slippery slope. And women, all the more so, it's very easy to, well, not easy, but they're likely, let's say, according to Rabbi Shimon, to sell themselves to prostitution if they need the money. And that obviously is not a good place where we want them to be. So all the more so they should have been, but the Torah says no. So what I wanted to read you is the Rambam. The Rambam in Hilchot Mamrim, when discussing the halachot of the Ben Sorer Moreh, says in Perek Zayin Halacha Yud Aleph, Gzerat HaKatshuva Shisakel Ben Sorer Moreh. Okay, it's Gzerat HaKatshuva that the Ben Sorer Moreh gets stoned. Aval Habat Enani Donet Bedin Zeh. Okay, so far, same thing, right? But not girls. But then the continuation of the Rambam is very interesting. The Rambam then says, She'ein darkali mashech b'achila v'shtia ki'ish. Because women just don't get pulled by wine and meat like men do. And it's not in their nature. Okay? Shenemal ben velobat. Okay, and then basically says, and the pasuk basically supports that. The total opposite of Rabbi Shimon. And of course, the commentaries try to figure out how did he ignore Rabbi Shimon? So the Radbaz, so first of all, you have to remember the Rambam is living in Muslim Spain, and he even talks about how women barely left their house once or twice a month, and they certainly weren't out drinking and partying and getting into these kind of things. I mean, not to say there weren't any women engaged in prostitution, but it certainly wasn't commonplace. And obviously that influenced, I assume, the Rambam in his approach to this whole thing. So the Radbaz says, but what does he do with Rabbi Shimon, right? He says the exact opposite. The Radbaz suggests that the Rambam viewed it as, well, this is Rabbi Shimon. It must be the rabbis disagree because it was so hard for him to grasp the concept that, or at least he didn't believe that concept, that he assumes the rabbis must have disagreed with Rabbi Shimon, even though they're not mentioned in the Gemara, and therefore he brings an alternative explanation, which is just interesting in and of itself. Okay, now we're going to move on. So we have two approaches to whether girls are more likely or less likely to get into bad places if they eat a lot of, steal money, eat wine, eat meat, drink wine. Now, you would assume that when we're talking in the Torah says, and maybe I'll just read the psukim for a minute, Ki ish ben sorer moreh, if a person has a child who becomes rebellious, he doesn't listen. Later, we'll get to drashot on this, to his parents. V'yisuru oto v'lo yishma alehem. Okay, they're yisuru oto. That means they give him lashes. Okay, v'lo yishma alehem, and he still doesn't listen. Okay, this is similar, and there's a lot of similarities to the sota, where we have a situation where there's different stages. Remember, the sota, there's also a first stage, and then he warns her, and then there's a second stage. Also here, there's a first stage where basically the child is warned and he's flogged. And then he still continues not to listen. Then va'amru ziknei, which is very similar. Just like in the sota, the husband has to bring his wife. And as it doesn't just happen automatically, it's only a case where the husband says, I'm bringing my wife into to figure out if she's a sota. Also here, like hanging out your dirty laundry, right? The parents have to come forward to the zkinim and say, we have a problem here. B'neinu zeh sorer umoreh, nenu shomeh b'koleinu, right? He's sorer, he's moreh, he's rebellious against us. He doesn't, right? He kind of left the path and is rebellious. No, is against us. Nenu shomeh b'koleinu, he doesn't listen to what we say. Zolel v'soveh. Now, zolel v'soveh, we're going to see means he drinks a lot and eats a lot. Okay, so that's what we're going to get to. And the drinking and the eating, we assume, is wine, which we'll explain in the Mishnah how they get to this wine and meat. Now, you would assume that we're talking about consumes large amounts. We're going to see that the amounts are not so large, okay, and it's a little surprising, but let's go through. Okay, he has to eat a tartemar of meat, which we don't know yet what that is, and drink a half a log of wine. Okay, a log of wine is 300 to 600 milliliters, something like that. It's not so much, especially if you're talking about half that amount. Either 150, I say a range because there's always a lack of clarity exactly about the shiurim, but somewhere in that range. And it seems like the italki is defining the wine, like good Italian wine. It has to be good wine, it sounds like. Rabbi Yossi Omer, he disagrees and says, Maneh basar v'log yain. Okay, so the log yain is double the portion instead of half a log, a whole log. And maneh basar means if you take 100 dinarim, like those dinarim, we always talk about zuzim, and you weigh them, the weight of that, which the footnote in the Koring puts it at around 490 grams. Okay, that's not a lot of meat, by the way. Okay, and that's the double, that's the maneh. Okay, forget about, we don't even know what Tanakh says, tartemar. But he obviously must say less because if the amount of wine is less, probably the meat is less. And we'll get to that soon in the Gemara when they try to figure out what a tartemar is. So this isn't a ton, what you would have expected. What we're going to see in the next Mishnah, and this is important just so you know, because they assume you already know all the Mishnayot when we get to the Gemara, which is the next Mishnah says, Ganav Mishel Aviv, this is tomorrow. It's the assumption of the next Mishnah is you have to steal the money in order to buy the meat or the wine. Okay, it's not just that you ate a lot of food, or this particular food, but you also stole the money in order to get it. And we're going to learn he stole the money from the parents. Okay, steals money from his parents to then do that. Okay. Now, so achal b'chavurat mitzvah, achal be'ibor hachodesh, achal maser sheni b'Yerushalayim. Okay, so now we're going to have all sorts of exceptions to the rule. Okay, if you ate in a chavurat mitzvah, okay, you ate in a some sort of ceremony. Okay, I just want to point out because I'm sorry, I'm distracted by the chat. A half a kilo is about a pound. Okay, so that's true. It's about a pound. It sounds like a lot. It's not a ton for a growing boy, right? It's not a crazy amount of meat. Now, like you go to a restaurant, you would get, let's say, a 300 gram, and then sometimes they even sell a bigger portion. They sell a 500 gram. It's not an insane amount. And think about the Tanakh, which we're going to say says half that amount. That's really not a lot. That's like a normal size steak that you would get, if you're going out or something. So it's not so much. You'd think we're talking about someone who really, has a passion and eats a lot, like all you can eat and they eat tons of, it doesn't sound that way. Okay, getting back to the Mishnah. Achal b'chavurat mitzvah, achal b'ibor hachodesh. Okay, achal maser sheni b'Yerushalayim. These are three things that are considered like a seudat mitzvah sort of thing. If you eat in a chavurat mitzvah, there's people doing a mitzvah and they're eating a meal as part of their mitzvah. Like, I don't know, you go to Brit Milah and you eat a lot of meat. Okay, let's say your Brit is in the afternoon, although I did go to a meat Brit once in the morning. And achal b'ibor hachodesh. Okay, you ate in this big meal that they would have. We'll learn more about it later. They would have when they determined the new moon. Okay, they wanted people to know about it. They made a big meal. Achal maaser sheni b'Yerushalayim. You ate the second tithe, which is supposed to be brought to Jerusalem, and you ate. Remember, if you often brought the money to Jerusalem, you would redeem it, and then in Jerusalem you could buy meat with it. So if you eat the meat as part of that, you're not liable. We'll get to all this later, but the assumption is because you're involved in a mitzvah, it's not something that's going to pull you to do the same thing tomorrow and the next day and the next day. Now we're on the other flip side. If the meat wasn't kosher, okay, or you're eating creepy crawlers, which are forbidden to eat, or, okay, the rest is in parentheses, I'm skipping that. Which is really a repeat. If you eat something that's a mitzvah or you eat something that's a sin, okay, which kind of define the last two categories. Gemara later is going to say, what do these two things add? We already said this. Achal kol ma'achal v'lo achal basal. Or you ate any other food in large quantities, but not meat. Or shata kol mashke v'lo shata yain. Or you drank any other drink, but not wine. Later again, the Gemara is going to say, what is this coming to include? Eino naaseh ben soreh moreh. You're not a ben soreh moreh. And again, you're not going to be liable. Ad shochal basal v'yishteh yain. Okay, it has to be meat. It has to be wine. Why? Shenemar zolel v'soveh. Okay, and they assume zolel v'soveh means drinking wine and eating meat. Though we don't have clear proof, there's an allusion in a pasuk to this, that zolel is wine and soveh is meat. Shenemal, oh sorry, I said it wrong. Soveh is wine and zolel is meat. Shenemal alti b'soveh yayin b'zolele basar lamo. Okay, it's a pasuk from Mishlei. We're going to quote a lot of pasukim from Mishlei today. Don't be among those who drink a lot of wine and eat a lot of meat. Okay, and there you have those verbs go with those things. Sorry that I confused them before. I had it confused in my head. Okay, Amar Rabbi Zera. Now we start with the Gemara. That was all the Mishnah telling us exactly what he has to do. Again, not all the details, but the details of what has to be eaten and how much of it has to be consumed in order to become a ben soreh moreh. Amar Rabbi Zera, tartemar ze eni yodea mahu. It's not just that we didn't know what a tartemar was, neither did Rabbi Zera. So he says, but I'm smart, I can figure it out. Since in the part about the wine, Tanach gives half the amount, right? Rabbi Yossi doubles the amount of wine. It must be Rabbi Yossi doubles the amount of meat, and therefore tartemar must be half a maneh, which, as I said before, about 245 grams of meat. Amar Rav Hanan bar Molada, Amar Rav Huna. Eino chayav ad shikach basar bezol v'yikach, yain bezol v'yishteh. Okay, now the assumption is he knows the next Mishnah, and what he means is you have to first steal money, even though he doesn't say this. Okay, this is Rav Hanan bar Molada saying in the name of Rav Huna that what you have to do is first you have to steal the money. Then you have to go buy meat, but you have to buy meat cheaply. Okay, we're not talking about fancy meats, because fancy meats you're not going to be able to keep stealing money and buying fancy meats. And again, we're looking for something that's going to turn into a trend, and you're going to continually do this. So if it's fancy meat, you're not going to be able to go to the store every time, steal, which, by the way, you're stealing from your parents, right? You steal from your parents and then buy fancy meats. That won't be a habit you can keep up. So therefore, it has to be yikach basar bezol v'yochal. You have to buy the meat cheaply. So you steal the money, you buy the meat, cheap meat, and then you eat it. And yayin bezol v'yishteh. And same thing with the wine. Dichtiv zolel v'soveh. Okay, again, they get that from the pasuk. Because what does it say? Zolel. Zolel milashon zol, cheap. Okay, they do a different drasha here. V'amar Rav Hanan bar Molada amar Rav Huna, another statement he makes, Eino chayav ad shochal basar chai v'yishteh yayin chai. You're only going to be liable if you eat meat that's raw and wine that's not diluted. Remember, all the wine they diluted. Otherwise, it's a very concentrated thing and it's really not tasty. Okay, so the Gemara is going to say, what are you talking about? That's going to attract you to more. Ini, is that really true? And really what they're going to ask from something else, which is, Ha Rabba of Rav Yosef, Amr Travayu, and as Haka Rav Huna said, as Rav and Yosef both agreed, if you eat the meat raw and you eat the wine not diluted, which is obvious, right? You're not going to become a ben soreh moreh. That's not something you're going to continually do. It's disgusting. So Amar Ravina, what they meant, what Rav Huna meant, Rav Hanan bar Molada quoted him, Yayin chai mazig v'lo mazig, basar chai bashil v'lo bashil. Basar kiba da'achle gangbe. When they said you're only liable if you eat the wine that's not diluted, what they meant is not fully diluted. And when they said cooked, not fully cooked. In other words, this is the way of thieves, okay? Like basar kubi, the thieves eat, kiva, the thieves eat, which is they don't cook their meat fully. Do you remember ma'achal ben drosai from Shabbat? It's the amount your meat has to be cooked before Shabbat. Like if you put up a chillin, the meat has to be cooked a certain amount. Because otherwise, right, and the amount is it has to be at least potentially able to be eaten before Shabbat, which is either a third or a half. It's the way Ben Drosai, who was a known robber, would eat his food, because that's something that it's somewhat edible, and it's also the type of way that people who eat in that kind of way that are thieves, that's the way they eat. So that's when you're going to be liable. Rabba of Rav Yosef to Amr Travayu. Another thing they said. If you eat salted meat, it's also something that apparently if you leave the meat to salt for a while, it takes away the flavor. Or you drink wine from the gat, meaning from the wine press before it's fermented, you're not a ben sorer moreh. So now we want to know, how long is maliach considered that it's already got no flavor? That again, what's the issue? It's just not enough of a pull. The wine, right? It's not really wine yet. So it's not going to pull you to buy more wine and steal more money to buy more wine. And the meat is not so appealing, so it's not going to attract you to, it's not an indicator that you're going to be pulled to continue doing this. So in order to understand this, they're going to bring a Mishnah from Masechet Ta'anit about what you can't eat Erev Tisha B'Av. Okay, nowadays we don't eat meat or drink wine during the whole week of Tisha B'Av, of the 9 days, and depending on your custom, but in those days that wasn't the custom yet. Okay, so they only talk about Erev Tisha B'Av. Lo yochal adam shnei tavshilim, you shouldn't eat two cooked foods. V'lo yochal basal v'lo yishteh yayin. Okay, and you shouldn't drink wine and eat meat. Vitana, there's a bright on this that explains achal ochel hu basar. Aval ochel hu basar maliach v'shoteh yayin migito. But what you can eat, you can't have wine and meat, but you can have this basar maliach, salted meat, and wine from the wine press because it's not fermented yet. Basar maliach ad kama. Now the Braita explains what's the definition, and then we're going to say, well, can we apply this definition to us as well? Right? You would assume once we have a definition of what basar maliach is and what yain mikito is, we can apply it, but we're going to see maybe it's a little bit different. So they say basar maliach ad kama. Amar Rabbi Chanina bar Kahana kol zman shu kishlamim. Okay, shlamim has a certain amount of time. It's korban shlamim. It's the korban that the owner who brings the sacrifice eats, and they have 2 days after bringing the sacrifice to eat it. So they say it's the same amount of time for a shlamim is the amount of time your meat is salted that are already it's considered bad, and that's the kind. So if it sat salting for 2 days, then already we're going to let you eat it on Tisha B'Av, Erev Tisha B'Av. V'yayin migito ad kama. Kozman shu toses. By the way, the Koran has a good footnote that explains what's the connection to the shlamim, and it connects back to this this Gemara we saw in Bava Batra that they wouldn't after the temple was destroyed, they wanted to forbid meat because of the korbanot, and they said, well, we don't have korbanot, so we shouldn't eat meat anymore. And then they said, here we're going to have a few discussions today about not eating meat. Get back to that later. And they said, in the end, they allowed it, but here they seem to have limited it on Erev Tisha B'Av, right? Just the day at the temple, and that's why it connects with the Shlamim definition, because what's defined for Korban is what we're defining that we're not allowed to eat on Erev Tisha B'Av because we're sad about the destruction and the fact we did the temple. Yain toses, so what's that? Yain migito ad kama. What does it mean? Wine out of the wine press, fresh out of the wine press. How many days? Kozman shu toses. Okay, while it's still, I'm not sure the definition in English, but it's still, it hasn't yet fermented. Vitanya, and there's a Braita that defines this. How much is yain toses? So first we're going to just say something about yain toses in the Braita, and then the Braita will define. Yain toses ein bo mishum giloi. Okay, this is wine that's not fermented yet. Doesn't have an isur of giloi. What's giloi? This is when if you leave water overnight uncovered, there's a concern that a snake put his venom in it and you can't eat it because it's dangerous. Okay, you might die from it. So, but wine that's fresh out of the wine press, that's not going to happen with this yain toses. So now, okay, we don't care about that halacha right now for our purposes, but they now define in this bright, and that's why we brought it, kama tesisato. How much is this? In other words, we had yain migito, they defined as kozman shu toses. Now we don't know what that is, so we bring a bright that talks about toses, and then it says how much is that? Shlosha yamim. It's 3 days. Okay, so for the first 3 days, it's considered yain toses. So if it's within the first 3 days, you can drink it on Erev Tisha B'Av. Hachamai, but what about by us? Is it the same definition? Hatam mishum simchahu. There, the issue is we don't want you to be happy. It's Erev Tisha B'Av. Kozman shu kishlamim nami utbahu simcha. Hacha mishumim shuchehu ubekol shu lo memshach. Says there, it has to be like shlamim. Because shlamim has to do with simcha, and the definition, right? We go by the definition for the shlamim. And that's Tisha B'Av. So that's why we have the definition by Tisha B'Av. But here, it has nothing to do with simcha. In other words, there what they say is, kol od, it's within 2 days, the meat, or it's within 3 days in the wine press, right? There's no simcha. associated with it, right? If it's past 2 days, if it's within 2 days, there is simcha. Past 2 days, there isn't. If the wine is past already 3 days from the wine press, there'll be simcha. Okay, that's one definition. But what we're looking for is something that's going to be enticing and cause the Ben Sorah Moreh to basically continue in doing this. Now, already they say this is going to be a much smaller, it's going to be much more limited, which is if you salt that water, you salt that meat even a little bit, which is what they say, like overnight. If it's just salted overnight, that already is not, it's already taking out its flavor and it's not going to be so good. And you're not going to continue to eat this kind of meat. And yain adarbeim yom. And the wine also, if it's within the first 3 days, that may be right. If it's we'll say that's not simcha, but past 3 days already is. But past 3 days, 4 days, 5 days, 6 days, up to 40 days, it's not really wine that's going to entice you. So therefore, again, we're very much so limiting what's going to make it forbidden. Because all 40 days, you can drink that wine and we're not worried you're going to be a Ben Sorah. We're not going to call you a Ben Sorah Moreh. And if the meat was salted just overnight, also we're not going to call you a Ben Sorah Moreh. Okay, again, what we're seeing here, and similar to the seudat, I compared them before, is that we have so many criteria that make it virtually impossible to have a case of Ben Sorah Moreh. We're going to see that over and over. Okay? Amar Rabbi Chanan, lo nivra yayin ba'olam. Now we're going to get off on a slew of statements about wine. Is wine a good thing? Is wine a bad thing? Right? I mean, we use wine for kiddush. Right? On the other hand, wine is considered bad and causes people to sin. So, lo nivra yayin ba'olam ela l'nachem avelim u'lishalem sachar l'rishaim. Okay, they say here's the dual nature of wine. Number one, it's there to help people who are mourning. Okay, to ease their pain. Okay, which is interesting because nowadays also we don't drink wine during Shiva, but in general it means also not just avelim, but people who are suffering. We'll see that later. And also to give reward to Rishaim in this world so that they get all the rewards in this world, and in the next world they'll get all their punishment. Shnei amar, tnu shechar la'oved, which is give shechar, give beer to the one who's lost. That means the rasha, the bad person. The yayin l'marei nefesh, and wine to the people who are having, who are sad in their soul. Amar Rabbi Yitzchak, my dichtiv al tera yayin ki et adam. What we're going to basically do is quote all sorts of psukim about wine. Right? Don't look at wine because it's red, or yit adam, it will cause redness. Al tera yayin shema'adim pneihem shel rishayim ba'olam hazeh. It makes their faces red in this world, but malbim pneihem la'olam haba. But in the next world, they'll be white, right? They'll be embarrassed. Okay, it will be an embarrassment for them. Rava Amar al tera yayin ki et adam, right? Red cheeks is considered a good thing, right? In this world, they'll benefit from it, but in the next world, they'll be really humiliated. Rava, which goes with what we said before. Rava Amar al tera yayin ki et adam, al tera yayin she'acharito dam. Okay, drinking a lot of wine will cause you to spill blood. Okay, and this is what we're worried about the Ben Sorah Moreh. Rav Kahana Rami, he says there's a contradiction. K'tiv tirash, ukrinan tirosh. Okay, this could be a whole bunch of different psukim in the Torah. Some come from the brachot of Yitzchak, the brachot that he gives, where it says tirosh. It's written as tirash, it's spelled as tirosh. So, zacha, again, shows the dual nature. Zacha na'aseh rosh. Okay, rosh, tirosh, could be looked at as rosh, head, with a vav. Lo zacha na'aseh rash. But if not, you could become poor. Okay, and this is showing the dual nature. Some people say this means if you drink too much, right? If you drink a small amount, you'll be a rosh. It takes you to a good place. If you drink a large amount, it's bad. Okay, apropos, we're heading toward Purim. Okay, so think about your drinking before you do it. Rav Kahana Rami, K'tiv tirash, ukrinan tirash. Rav Rami, K'tiv yishamach, ukrinan yisamach. Okay, this is a well-known pasuk. Yain yisamach lavav enosh. Okay, wine will make happy the hearts of people. So, but it could be read as yishamach, which we're going to change the chet and the hey, which we do a lot. It's going to be yishama, which is like shmama, desolate. Okay, so it could be read in both ways. Zacha misamcho. Again, if you do it right, it can make you happy. Lo zacha mishamamehu. But if not, it can make you desolate. V'hainu da'amar Rava chamra berechani pikachin. And this is what Rava said. When I mix my wine with besamim, it actually makes me pikachin. It makes me more smart. Amrav Amram Bered Rav Shimon Bar Abba Amar Rabbi Chanina. My dichtiv. Okay, now we're going to quote this pasuk of Mishlei, which is hard to understand. Lemi oi ulemi avoy. Here we get oi vavoy. Okay, to who is oi? To who do we say avoy? Lemi midanim, who is part of fighting. Lemi siach, who has conversation. Lemi ptsaim, to who are there ptsaim chinam, like wounds for no reason. Lemi chachlilut enaim. I'm not sure what chachlilut enaim is. See if Rashi says no, but something with your eyes. Lema'acharim ala yain laba'im lichkor mimsach. Oh, red eyes, right? Thank you. Who has red eyes? Okay. To those who search for wine, leba'im lichkor mimsach, who go to seek this mimsach, this mixture of the wine with the besamim. So the Rava made mention of. So it's unclear what this pasuk means. Ki'ata Rav Dimi Amar, when Rav Dimi came from Israel, he told us, Amr Marav in Eretz Israel, they say, Hi Kraman de Darish Lemiresha the Seifa Midrash, and we say for the Resha Midrash. You could read it from front, right from the beginning to the end, and you could also read it from the end to the beginning. Okay, either which way you could read it, and there's two different ways of reading it. And one is positive, one is negative. If you read it from the beginning, basically say, who do we say oy vavoy? Who gets into these fights? It sounds like a bar brawl, right? People who are always searching for wine, they get into these fights with people, and it causes a lot of red eyes and crying. Some people say you can read it from the end to the beginning. Those who seek wine are those who are having troubles. They're oy vavoying, they're in a fight with someone, or they have red eyes because they're crying, and they look for the wine for solace. Okay, so you can read it in both ways. Tarash over Galilai, a guy who was passing through the Galilee, said the following: Shlosha sar vavim yemru b'yayin. There's 4 vav yuds. Okay, vav yud, if you know in the Torah, like vayomal, vaye this. It's the beginning of a verb. So there's 13 verbs in the section of Noach. You might remember the section of Noach where he gets drunk. Okay, we're going to talk about it right now. So there's 13 vavs that says by wine. ויחל נוח איש אדמה ויתעקר ויש מנעיים וישכר ויתגל בתוך עולו וירחם אבי כנען את ערוות אביו ויגד לשני אחיו בחוץ ויקח שם ויפת את השמלה וישימו על שכם שניהם וילכו אחורנית ויחסו את ערוות אביהם ופניהם בגומר ויקץ נוח מעינו וידע את אשר עשה לו בנו הקטן. Okay, that was a long section, but you saw the vaya. I read it fast, so you got that, like the flow of all these 13 things. Okay, and what it's saying is those are like 13 woe about wine, right? Like vai is like oy vavoy. Okay, so Noach is ish adama, okay, and then he plants a vineyard. He drinks from the wine. He gets drunk. Then his body is revealed inside his tent. His Ham, the son of Canaan, comes and sees his father. We'll see later why they call him the father of Canaan. He sees his father naked. He tells his brothers outside. Shem and Yafet come in, his 2 brothers. They cover Noach. They put, right, and then they basically walk him backwards so they don't see him, and they cover his body. Okay, and then Noach wakes up. He realizes what happens, and then he curses. They don't tell you this, but he curses Canaan, which is weird. Why doesn't he curse Ham? So we're going to talk about this section. Rav and Shmuel. So first of all, the main thing to see here is this is, right, what happened here when he got drunk. Okay, obviously the bad effects of wine. What did Ham do exactly? It's not so clear from the text. It just says he saw his father naked, but they say it must be, if he got cursed, it must have been much worse than that. So Rav and Shmuel chadamar sirso v'chadamar reva'o. One said he castrated him, the other said he sodomized him. Okay, so now we're going to try to figure out what's the support for each one. Mandamar sirso, if you say castrated, well, mitosha kilkalobi revi'i, kilalobi revi'i. They're all trying to figure out why Canaan is the one who was cursed. First of all, why the son of Ham, and why the 4th son of Ham. So they say, oh, very obviously, he castrated him, which meant he couldn't have a 4th son, which meant then he cursed Ham with his 4th son. Okay, that works. Manda Amar Riva. Oh, if you say sodomized him, where does he learn that from? Gamar Vayar, because it says Ktiv Hacha Vayar Chama Biknani saw the error of his father. Uktiv Hatam Vayar Otashchem Ben Chamor. When Shchem rapes Dinah, he sees her first. So we're assuming the seeing goes along with raping, and that must be that he raped him. So Bishlam Alaman Damar Sirson Shum Hachi Kilalo B'Revi'i. Well, what about the fact that he cursed Canaan? It doesn't make sense, right? It makes sense according to the first explanation. Elaman Damar Riva'o, but if he raped him, Maishna Revi'i, Nilati Behedya. You should have just cursed him directly. Why curse his 4th son? Hava ha havai. So they say, if you say he raped him, you actually have to say he castrated and raped him. Okay? Because otherwise it really doesn't explain the Canaan thing. Now they're going to figure out what made Noach go wrong. Vayachal Noach ish adama v'yitakerem. So now they want to know, why do they call him ish adama, a man of the land? Amar Rav Chisda, Amar Rav Ukva, Amar la Amar Ukva, Amar Rabbi Zakan, Amar lo Kadosh Baruch Hu l'Noach, Noach, lo haya lecha lemo me'adam harishon shelo garam lo el hayayin. Shouldn't you have learned why Adamah from Adam? Shouldn't you have learned from Adam harishon, who, what brought his sin about? Wine. Okay, how do we know that? What do you mean? Wasn't it because he ate from the Eitz Hadat? Well, Kamanda Amar, Toilan Sha'acham Mimenu Adam Harishon. Gefen Haya. If you remember, there's a big machloket. We saw it in Brachot. What was the fruit on the tree? Okay, nobody thinks it was an apple. That's a Christian image. But Rabbi Meir Omer Toilan Sha'achal Adam Harishon Mimenu Gefen Haya. Okay, the first opinion is Rabbi Meir, who says it was a geffen. Okay, it wasn't a tree at all. It was a grape, a vineyard. She'en lecha davar. Why? Well, going now to Amabet. And lecha davar shemavia la'adam elayayin. Right? We know that is what causes people to sin. That goes with our sugya. But let's just hear the other opinions. Rabbi Yehuda Omer chita haya. It was wheat, which also wasn't a tree. She'en atinok yodeh likot abba v'ima ad she'tom tam dagan. Okay, they make this association that when a child first starts eating grains, that's around the same time that they start saying Abba and Ima, which means the grains are associated with knowledge. Okay, and therefore Eitz Hadat, the tree of knowledge, it must have been wheat. Rabbi Nechemya Omer te'ena haya, must have been a fig. Shebedavar shekokalo boni taknu. Shenemar b'thura le te'ena. Right, when they realize that they're naked, they cover themselves with fig leaves. So it must be that the fig was what they ate, and then they used it to fix. Right, that's like this concept of you fix what you did wrong with the item itself. Okay, that was an aside. Back to our topic of wine. Another person who's reprimanded is Divrei Lemuel Melech, Masah Asher Yisarto Imo. This is in Mishlei, chapter 31, which actually is known more famously for Eshet Chayil, but Eshet Chayil only comes up later in the chapter. It actually starts with another woman, and it starts with the mother of Lemuel, and they're going to say Lemuel is Shlomo HaMelech, and it's Batsheva. And Batsheva is giving Yisarto. By the way, this is from the same language, and you're going to see that this is a little similar to him being called a Ben Sorero Moreh, even though he doesn't fit the criteria exactly. He was a little old when he swayed from his ways, and it wasn't like he wasn't listening to his parents, he wasn't listening to God. But we all know Shlomo at the end of his life basically ends up marrying Paro, and his wives sway his heart, and he leaves God somewhat, does bad things. So she starts reprimanding him. And what I wanted to point out, Yisarto Imo, is the same as Vayisluoto, which I read in the Pasuk of the Ben Soreh Moreh, right? They give him lashes in the beginning to warn him before they actually kill him, right? And if he continually doesn't listen, then he gets killed. So Amar Rabbi Yochanan Mishumar B'Shumar Ben Yochai, Melamed Shekefato Imo al Ha'amud. Okay, what does this mean? What does it mean, Yisarto Imo? Because Yisru usually means lashes. She tied him up to a beam, and then she started talking to him. So that was Pasuk Aleph. Now we're getting to Pasuk Bet. Ma bri umar bar bitni umar bar nedarai. So she starts saying, what, my son, okay, Bri is my son, bar bitni, the one who came out of my womb, and the one of my vows. Okay, so what does this pasuk mean? Very unclear. Ma bri, notice she says my son. She doesn't say our son. So she says to him like this, you've gone off the path. Hakol yodim shavicha yirei shamayim hava. Everybody knows your father was a God-fearing person. Achshav yaru imo garmalo. They're going to blame me for your bad deeds because they're going to say, obviously, it didn't come from David. So they're going to say, right, it's her son. Okay, not it's their son. Mar bar bitni. Now she's going to start saying, it's not fair to do this to me because I did everything I could to get you to a good place. It's a little bit of an interesting thing for a mother to be telling her child, but let's listen. She's going to compare herself both in this phrase and the next phrase to all the other women who are married to David. All the other women, once they got pregnant, they don't have sexual relations anymore because they're pregnant. But I pushed my way in to be able to have sex with your father while I was pregnant. I wanted to have the strongest, and what she really means is strong in Torah. Okay, I wanted to make you better. And there was this sense that if you have sexual relations when you're pregnant, it creates better children. Okay, why they said that, why they believe that, I don't know. Maybe they thought that men were going to be, scared to have sex with their pregnant wives, and maybe tried to encourage it in a positive way of saying it's good for your children. I don't know, but she's saying I was different because I insisted on doing this, and in order to make you better. They all took vows. That is apparently a thing, right? To take vows. Oh, I'll do this so that I have a better son. They all wanted to have, okay, you're married to the king. You want your son to be the king. So they all took vows that their son be the king. Me, I didn't do that. I wanted you to be good for, right, ready to learn Torah and be potentially a prophet. Okay, that's what my vow was for. And look, you messed it all up. Now the pasuk continues. That was pasuk bet. Now we skip to pasuk pasuk daled. Al lemelachei lemuel, al lemelachim shto yayin. So what does this mean? Al lemelachim. Amralo, she said to him, Malachayis lemelachim. What are you going like kings? Sheshotim yayin umishtakrim va'omrim lama lanu el. Kings often say, right, like, what do I need God for? I'm the king. I'm so great. And they just go and they drink wine and get drunk and party. V'leroznim eshechar. What's that? What does that mean? That's also in the pasuk. Mishakol razei olam. So roznim could be from razei olam or secrets. You're someone who has all the secrets of the world. Remember, Shlomo was considered a very wise man, and he understood how to speak to trees and animals. Yishteh yayin v'yishtaker. You know everything. You're going to drink wine and get drunk. Some people say also, like, nichnas yayin yatzah sod, like all your secrets are going to be revealed when you drink wine. Some people say, Misha kol rozne olam ashkimim lepitcho, yishteh yayin v'yishtaker. All the wise people of the world come to hear from you every day. What, you're going to get drunk and not be there to answer their questions? Amar Rabbi Yitzchak, minayin shechazar Shlomo v'hoda l'imo. How do we know that he actually took her advice and said, you're right, I'm wrong? Dichtiv. Now, don't be tricked. This pasuk is the chapter before. It's not like this comes right after, but in the world of drasha, you can do this. The chapter before says, Kivar anochi me'ish velo binat adam li. So, var anochi me'ish, right? I'm a foolish person, and I'm foolish from ish. Okay, what does that mean? Kibar anochi me'ish mi Noach. Dichtiv, vayachal Noach ish adama. Now, I was foolish to not learn from Noach's lessons, right? We complain that Noach didn't learn from Adam's lessons. Now we're going to say, Shlomo was foolish. He didn't learn from Noah's lessons that, again, he drank wine and that caused him to sin. Velo binat Adam li. Again, this is a reference to, I didn't have the wisdom of Adam. Again, it's a reference to, I wasn't, right? I didn't learn from Adam Harishon. Ze Adam Harishon, who ate, right, drank wine, and also it caused him to sin. So I wasn't smart enough, and I admit my failure. Now, that was all. So what we did right now, I'm going to do the summary of this part for right now, and then we'll finish up, which is, until now, we started with how much wine, how much meat, what are all the criteria? Okay, we'll get now to all the criteria of like how you ate your meal and all that, the rest of the part of the Mishnah. And then we went into, right, with the Gemara tried to figure out exactly how much and what are these measurements. And then, what about the Basar Maliach and the Yain Mikito and what those are, and different kinds of wines that you can drink and eat. Okay, then we got to the good things and the bad things about wine and how wine caused other people during history to sin. And this is basically setting up why we're going to say this Ben Sorem Merez and Don Hashem Safo, because look what happened, right? Look where the wine took these people. Now we're going to go through the details of the Mishnah, the Chaburat Mitzvah, Ibur Chodesh, Maaser Sheni, Nevelot Trevot. On each section, we're either going to explain a little more in detail, like what's this line doing there, what's it teaching us, or we're going to actually bring a contradictory source. So Achab Chaburat Mitzvah, Amar Rabbi Avau. So here we're going to first quote Rabbi Avau and then say, doesn't that contradict our Mishnah? Eino chayav ad shuchab chabura shekula srikin. If you're eating with a group, and that's the only way we're going to make you liable for being a ben surah moret, is if you eat in a company of people who are all bad people, empty people. That's what a srikin is, empty people. So the Gemara says, what do you mean? V'hanan tnan achab chaburat mitzvah ino nase ben surah moret. If you eat at a seudat mitzvah, right, or a group of people doing a mitzvah, it's not a problem. So what does that sound like? What does that have to do with this? Well, Tama de mitzvah sounds like if you're eating in a mitzvah meal. But halav mitzvah, afagav de lav kula slikin. It sounds like as long as your meal is not a mitzvah meal, then you can be liable. It doesn't matter who's at your meal. It sounds like even if they're all streaking, because, right, even if they're not all streaking, it would be a problem because we're comparing eating at a mitzvah meal, which we assume has not empty people in it, right, compared to not in a mitzvah meal with those same kind of people. So, which the Gemara says, no, hakamash malan, you can read it like this. Afagav de kula strikin, kevan de mitzvah kasik lo mimshach. You can eat at a mitzvah meal with all empty people, okay? Just because it's a mitzvah meal doesn't mean empty people don't eat mitzvah meals. So you could be at a, let's say at a wedding or a Brit Milah, and there's all empty people there. You're still, even though you're with all empty people, it's not something that's going to sway you to do this all the time because you're at a mitzvah meal. But if you were at a meal that wasn't a mitzvah with all empty people, then you're not going to be able to do it. Then there's a concern you're going to sway from the path and become we can make you liable. So that didn't contradict the Mishnah. Next one. Achal be'ibor chodesh. Lememra de basar v'yayim masku. Wait, it sounds like there was wine and meat at this ibor chodesh ceremony, right? Wouldn't you assume that? Well, why else would he be eating wine and meat at this meal? V'hatanya, but it says in a Braita, "Eino lila ela bepata gam v'kitni bavad." It was a vegan meal. Okay, all they would do was have grains and legumes. That was all they ate at that meal. So where's the meat and wine coming from? To which they answer, even though you only go up, they would go do it on the second floor. Even though you only go up with pot and kitnit, but he brought his own food. And he wasn't really part of the meal exactly, because he brings his own food, he brings his meat and wine, even though everyone else is eating something else. Since he's involved in a mitzvah, so we're not worried it's going to sway him. And he's going to continue in this way. Tanu Rabbanan. Now, since we already discussed this, now we're going to mention, well, let's hear about this meal of the Ibor Chodesh and what are the details of it. So the Braita says, first thing, you need 10 people. 2, the food, which we just said, only bread and legumes. You only do it the night after, okay? Motzei, the day that you decide, that's when you do the meal, at night. And you only go up at night, not during the day. To which the Gemara says, Vahatanya, wait a minute. A different Braita says, the opposite. You have to go up there during the day, not at night. So the answer, it's like Rabbi Chiya bar Abba told his sons. Really, the meal happened at night, but Rabbi Chiya bar Abba told his sons, make sure to go a little before it gets dark out and come back before it gets light out. Why is that? Because he wants people to know. The whole thing is that they did this meal so that everyone would know about the Ibor Chodesh. So if you go at night, no one sees you out on the streets at night. So you would have to go a little when it's still daylight and people would see you going. And in the morning, we want you to go back super early because then when people wake up at sunrise, they'll see you coming home. They'll know you stayed there all night. If they see you a little while after sunrise, they might think you went there after sunrise and that you weren't there for the meal at all. So that's the way you can publicize it, but it doesn't actually contradict because it just means a little before and a little, right? A little like get there while it's still day and leave there before the sun rises. Because he's eating it in a normal way, like that's what you have to do. You have to bring the Maser Sheni to Jerusalem and eat it there. Lo mimshach. We're not worried you're going to be swayed. The Maser Sheni is usually produce, but remember, you would redeem it onto money, and then you would take the money to Jerusalem and buy with it animals and other things, like you could buy meat with it. So Rabbi says if you eat chicken, that's not going to make you a ben soreh moreh. So again, but it says in our Mishnah, focusing on the creepy crawlers, right? If you eat creepy crawlers, you're not. Meat, yes, right? We assume if it says creepy crawlers not, then chicken is obviously going to be on the side of, yes, you would become a ben soreh moreh. Because hatahorim naaseh ben soreh moreh. If it was kosher, right, it would. So the answer, kitnanami manitin lahashlim. Now what the Mishnah is talking about is if you obviously have to eat meat, but what if you don't have that tartemar basal of meat and you have like half or 3/4, and then you're finishing, you fill it in with shim shchatzim or rumasim. That won't work. But if you fill it in with chicken, it will work. And that's the inference from the Mishnah. But if you just eat chicken, definitely not. So we said this line in the Mishnah seems totally unnecessary. We already listed some mitzvot and we listed some averot, some sins. So what does this line include? Dvar mitzvah tanchumei avelim. Okay, dvar mitzvah means what if you eat while you're menachem avelim, which is only a derabanan. Okay, like at a meal for avelim. Dvar avera tanit tzibur, which also fast days, or let's say you ate on a fast day, which would be an avera, then also we're not worried about you continuing, and that's also only derabanan. So what they're pointing at is even derabanan mitzvot and averot also. Okay, also we're going to be, you won't become a ben soreh moreh, you won't be liable. V'tam amai amar kra. What's the reason for all this? That if you do a sin or you do a mitzvah, or really a sin, we're not worried. Amar kra Einena shomeh b'koleinu, b'koleinu v'lo b'kolo shel makom. Right? A mitzvah, we said it's like a once in a while thing. You're not going to be pulled to do it. You did it because of the mitzvah. You didn't do it because you were being gluttonous. But the avera, what's the reason? Or you could say you're involved in bad things, so all the more so. But they say no, because it says, what's the problem with the Ben Soror Moreh? He doesn't listen to his parents. It's his parents, not to God. He listens to God. So therefore, if he's sinning to God, well, he's not a Ben Soror Moreh. This seems like just another way to limit who's going to be who's going to be liable. Okay, last thing for today. Okay, well, we already know it has to be meat and wine. So what are we adding by saying some other drink? What would we think? Or some other food? So we're going to basically talk about foods that intoxicate. Okay, which was this, I can't remember if it's figs or dates. I think it's dates. There was some delicacy they would make with them that also dates we know are somewhat intoxicating. Oh, it's figs. Okay. So it's figs. Figs and dates are both have this sweetness that can be somewhat intoxicating. Okay, it's to include honey and wine, which also intoxicate. If you remember Yael and Sisra, right? She gives him milk. So also milk can be intoxicating. Vitanya, achal dvela ki'ili v'shatad dvash v'chalav v'nichnas l'mikdash chayav. Here they tell you, they quote you a source that says you're not allowed to go in drunk to the temple. If you drank milk or honey, also you can't go into the temple. So it is considered drunk, but not going to work for Ben Soror Mored because we saw zolel v'saveh, meat and wine and not other things. Okay, with that we finish. So again, I already summarized the daf, so I'm not going to do it here. And with that, we finish for today. And I'll remind everyone what I mentioned yesterday, which is we'll be off of Zoom, only Zoom. The regular shiur will go up as usual. We'll just be off of Zoom from Friday through next Wednesday. Okay, I should be starting up again on Thursday. And so starting from this Friday, and like I said, if you're in Manhattan, you can come hear me speak on Shabbat. And yeah, that's it for today. Wishing everyone a good day and Shema B'Sorot Tovot. Definitely difficult days.